Dear, I started by saying good morning or good afternoon, but you've already taken the good out of it, right? By starting with,
Especially when you're reading about everyone else getting such large money, funding, coverages, attention. How do you process failure?
look, I'm a first generation entrepreneur. At a time when entrepreneurship was a shitty thing to get into. It was like everyone looked at you and said, okay, so you couldn't land yourself a job with somebody, so you became an entrepreneur. If they had to rename it now, they'd call it Ed AI, and they'll still go out to raise more money in that thought process. So, those are... Now, I think the first lesson everyone should hear is that no amount of funding can actually build a solid business if you don't set out to build a business.
This question is important to many of us in this room, and I'm going to say this, that you've advised entrepreneurs that raising capital should be the fifth item on their agenda, not the first. So what are the first four that should be? And Ronnie, it's such an honor sitting next to you, and thank you so much for coming to Tech Sparks. All of us, and I can say on behalf of all of us in this room, that we really, really look up to you. And now we have to get you to answer some questions because you anyways do always straight talk. And I'll begin right. I'm not beating around the bush. I'm going to really begin with you today are the founder of Upgrad, among different things that you've done, and we all know about it. But EdTech is under attack. And Byju's is a story, a drama unfolding that we all are witnessing, watching, and in some way feel that it has impacted us. Because there is this disbelief, there is this kya ho raha hai, paise aayenge ya nahi, or paise doob rahe. There's so many speculations. Tell us, how do we read this? And how do you read this? And what will you tell all of us? And I know you've said it doesn't matter.
Dear, I started by saying good morning or good afternoon, but you've already taken the good out of it, right? By starting with a story that's just stayed in the media for the longest period of time. And I think half the thing, I think the media needs to reflect, does a story like this need to be on the front page every single day? There isn't that much of learning for it to be on the front page every day. So it just perpetuates itself and becomes a story larger than it is. Look, firstly, I'd like to caveat, it is extremely tough to found a business, to build a business, to grow a business, to take care of all the failures that happen in a business and take the setbacks and go forward. So that's my first caveat. It is never easy. If you ask me some lessons here for everybody else, I think the biggest lesson everyone should understand, because, all the questions I heard here also are just back to funding. Now, I think the first lesson everyone should hear is that no amount of funding can actually build a solid business if you don't set out to build a business.
Now that we should all applaud. We all should agree, yeah.
And that penny has to drop with everyone. And to me is a stark learning. If somebody has raised $4 to $5 billion and not been able to build a business, it obviously means that money is not the answer. And funding is not the answer, and it's not the first step. And I would urge everyone to think that. And I think the second learning for a lot of people here is, look, it's very tough to start a business. It is incredibly tough to build, scale, and grow a business and stay the course on it. But there will be failures along the way. And I think the second learning here would be, if you don't have acceptance or your ability to accept where you failed, and I think that's the other challenge here with this particular story, is a delusional approach to not accepting, when things have gone wrong, accepting them and moving forward. Once you accept, solutions come about. If you don't accept, you're running down aground to the ground. So I think for everyone here to reflect, I hope we don't keep talking about this one story. I'm sure the media has more things to talk about, more important, more positive things to talk about. But if you had to, it's a prime example that funding does not solve everything.
And again, I'm just picking up from that, is that, Ronnie, you have talked about your failures and how they have been motivators to build profitable businesses for you. And you've only built profitable businesses. Tell us, how do we take failure? Because still, as entrepreneurs, as people, we start judging ourselves and we feel that hum sahi nahi hai. And especially when you're reading about everyone else getting such large money, funding, coverages, attention. How do you process failure?
Well, firstly, I don't think you should stop reading about media and what the other things are, because you've got to put your own benchmarks. I think, look, I'm a first generation entrepreneur at a time when entrepreneurship was a shitty thing to get into. It was like everyone looked at you and said, okay, so you couldn't land yourself a job with somebody, so you became an entrepreneur. Second, there was no concept. There were no angels floating in the skies. Forget about venture capitalists and anything else. So there was no such ecosystem. So you get grounded in a very different sense. And I think that's, to me, is my learning and pickup. I think today failure comes when we have a sense of entitlement. And I know that's a little bit of an evolved thought, but I do want to share that here, especially for this kind of an audience, that when we start something, I think I've been able to handle tons and tons of my failures because of my background, because I came from a lower middle class background, because I started with no sense of entitlement. And when you do that, your expectations, so there's two different things. You can have the highest level of expectations, but you can't have the highest level of entitlement. And they're two very different things, and you need to segregate between the two. And I think the best way I've handled my failures continuously is to double down on them, actually. I know at the stage at which you're failing, it is extremely cathartic. And the last I would say is we do spend 50% of our time trying to worry about what other people think. And the reason I can sit down here and give you my frank conversation of the first question you asked me is because you need to get past that. I'm saying it as it is. It doesn't make a difference. I'm sure 20 people will disagree with that. If we can, as entrepreneurs or people who are leaders, forget about whether you're running your own business or running it somewhere else. The minute 10 people report to you, you're a leader. Now, whether it's 10 people or 10,000 people, you're a leader. And at that stage, the first thing you need to dispose of is what other people think about what you're going to say.
We have a lot of government officials also here today amidst us. This is a question I think about. See, I am from Bihar and I am where I am, and many of us are where we are is only because of education, because there's no reason otherwise we would be anywhere. And you know, I know how mission driven you are with Upgrad, what you are doing. My question is, with all this edtech, the money that has gone in, we are still far off from making education accessible, quality education accessible, affordable to people in this country. What can we do better?
Look, firstly, I think the big mistake is the learning, skilling, and the workforce development and the career development space. I know we're calling it EdTech, firstly, so I think it's a horrible word. It came about because one or two people wanted to raise a lot of money, so they put an EdTech to it. If they had to rename it now, they'll call it EdAI, and they'll still go out to raise more money in that thought process. So, you know, those are... So I think that's a seasonality, you know. I mean, sometimes pomegranate season comes, sometimes grape season comes, sometimes the plum season comes. So I would say EdTech, EdAI, you can call it. And, you know, lots of people are going to put prefix and suffix of AI in the next 1 or 2 years. But so it's not that. Second, this sector actually does not need money. And it needs frugal innovation. And I think the moat or the benchmark for entrepreneurs in India is going to be, how do we build frugal innovation? And frugal doesn't mean no money. Frugal, when you are with low resources, that's when innovation comes in. The minute you raise a lot of money or a little bit more money than you thought, because the investor's saying, tank up for the winter. I don't know what that even means, but tank up for the winter. That means I've got excess money. Then my excess brain starts thinking of access. Innovation comes down, frugality vanishes, and mistakes happen. And I think this sector has gone through that cycle, and therefore, yes, it's at base camp. Second, the consumer, today, I think we've got lots of problems. And since you mentioned the government also, look, I think the government plays a very, very important role, because in this sector and in many sectors, the two critical elements of government is, one, to be a phenomenal catalyst, which means you light a lot of candles, you inspire people, and you do that. And the second one is evangelism. And I think today the government is doing an incredibly great job on both these, to be a catalyst and an evangelist. Look, I work in rural India with our foundation. And I can tell you, most people feel, oh, but you're working with the government. We don't work directly because we don't take money from the government directly. But the volunteers and the people from government working in rural India, as inspiring as our community, they actually are looking for people that can build trust for them and credibility for them to go forward. And I've seen enough cases there. So I think there's an incredible role for the government to play, but it needs to be a catalyst. Sometimes it needs to be a regulator, and in most times it needs to evangelize. And look, I think we're all sitting here also because the startup India actually evangelized and brought conversations for entrepreneurs into a dining room. Otherwise, you couldn't have a conversation with your parents about it. Yeah. But suddenly the Prime Minister of India is saying this is an aspirational thing. You could talk about it. And I think that's the evolution that's taking place.
Yeah. And on that note, a question, and especially, I'm not going to mention, but from a tech standpoint also, you are one of the people who has spoken, as I said, you speak very straightforwardly, so it's very good to talk to you because you don't beat around the bush. But the point is that on protectionism, you've said that we shouldn't look or seek for protectionism and policies, and it should be a fair play, a healthy, equal, fair play. But in India, where we're looking for vocal for local, where we're looking for Atmanirbharta, how do you think that we should work on this?
See, I think, look, we're a global economy. If we're going to be in the third largest economy, and then we're going to move to $10 trillion, we need to be a global economy. So when I say that in terms of protectionism, the biggest problem for an entrepreneur is if you don't have a competition, because you have no benchmark. So stop worrying about competition, because that's the only place that's going to keep you on your toes. Who else is going to keep you on your toes? Not your investors, not your brother, not your 3 people that you work with. So today, creating an environment, having a global approach where MNCs do bring in a certain sense of process, system, excellence, whatever else. On the flip side, I think India is not a dumping ground. We're not a syndication ground. And I think when I've said that, it is about, this is the place where you need to originate. And look, I come from a place in media where most multinationals have come in and been challenged till they localized. From the times of the past, and we've seen that, and we've seen circles of life happening, and today's announcement in the morning is one more circle of life. I won't go into the details because I'm from the media business, but it's one more circle of life. You come, you see, you blow. But if you haven't localized, India is one of those markets. It is not a market where you can plonk products. I think automobiles tried that in the first 2 or 3. The global automobiles, the German automobile came in and gave us, average models of their, and it didn't work. And then suddenly they realized, no, India is 10 times more aspirational than most of the world. So I better give them the best models in the country, and that's when it happened. So I think it's a process of learning for people. But today, benchmarks are there, and I think we need to accept that we're a global economy, whether we like it or not.
No, we like it. We are all beneficiaries of it. All of us are living it.
But we like it or not, and you can't say that because we do seek certain protectionism, and that's a double standard. Yes, if you ask me, it's double standards.
Yeah, that's true. I want to talk to you about the Swades Foundation, and I know, and we had interviewed your wife also many years back. How much of grassroots work, actual work that you're doing over there? Question, Ronnie, I have is that increasingly many of the young people, and most of us don't want to be do an NGO or work for an NGO. How do you think that young people should think about?
So first, I want to just tell you that the foundation that we have is not 10 years old. It's actually 30 years old. So I started our foundation when I was 22. Wow. So I do want to say to everybody here that you don't need to have gray hair or money in the bank to be able to think of the concept of giving back. And I think our principle was that if you had a 10,000 square foot office, the first 1,000 square feet in that office, we opened a little bit of an old age home and a creche. And actually the first 30 people and then the 300 people, our entire culture of the organization got formed because there was no concept of work-life balance, because at 7 o'clock, everyone would meander to this 1,000 square feet. And that's where the culture of the organization started. I'm just giving this to you anecdotally. My daughter did her film school from USC, came back, one project she did, and then decided she wanted to be in the not-for-profit space. And now she has a mentor and mentee program. And I'm seeing it from the outside, how frugal. I've seen just day before yesterday, 700 mentors that I talk to, just that level of inspiration that people have today to want to give back. So I think today it is obligatory for us. Every single person in this room today is blessed because you've had opportunities that many, many people don't have. And so you do need to, from day one, think about some element of high impact. You got to create things. You're building a business. You're not raising funds. You're building a business. With that has to come a level of impact to what you necessarily want to do. And once you build that impact, an element of thinking how to give back is very, very important.
I want to double down on this, that at 22 you started the NGO.
Yeah.
Wow.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah. So so you were not the Ronnie Screwvala which you are today with all the success and money. And it is so very important that we take this back when we go back to our lives.
And I think the question came about because many people said, how are you going to fund it? And I said, we'll figure it out. We don't need to have a benchmark. You don't need to have a corpus. If you have the right approach to things, the right resources will follow you. The timing could be a problem, and there'll be 4 months of high frustration. That's part of the challenge. And in the beginning, if you don't have frustration, then you're in big trouble. The biggest trouble people will have is to have an initial success, right? Because then you think that's what life is about. And then the rest of the next 10 years is a huge learning curve.
Yeah. Comes from wisdom. Yes. Ronnie, most investors we go to, most people we go to say that as entrepreneurs, you have to be very focused and you have to do only one thing. You, on the other hand, are the founder of Upgrad. Again, a startup you created very late and it is doing phenomenally well. You're also into movies. We all know that. And you're also into sports. You're doing so many different things. Tell us, how do you prioritize and what do we take from this?
No, I think my priority is quite clear. That I don't do any multitasking. Some people play golf. I make movies. So I think that's right now for me, at the stage at which I started a media company, it was my business. It was my core aspect and it got all my focus. Once I divested that and sold it to Disney and started our not-for-profit and started Upgrad, my focus right now is impact through our not-for-profit and for-profit. And in not-for-profit, we're in rural India. And in for-profit, we're in education and learning and skilling. And I think sports and, sports teams, I'm not going out there and playing myself. I'm part of a kabaddi league and part of a chess league and part of a table tennis league. And I think, as I said, it's a very strong passion for me. Storytelling is at the core. Because I started at a very, very modest stage, and because I did not finish my education in the flashy way in which many people do, and that was just by choice, I think I inherited soft skills. Part of the soft skills is the importance of storytelling. And I think I'm having this conversation with you and I'm sitting here because of what I've built over a period of the last 20 years is my ability to tell stories. And that doesn't mean you need to be eloquent. Every single person here has a story to tell. And that does not mean you need to be super fluent or you need to be under a spotlight and not be nervous. Just tell your story. And so to me, that element is just there. And I missed it after 5 years of my non-compete of not being in media. And that's how I went back to storytelling.
This question is important to many of us in this room. And I'm going to say this, that you've said, you've advised entrepreneurs that raising capital should be the 5th item on their agenda, not the first. So what are the first 4 that should be?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I've given the fundraising as the 5th title. And I'm saying actually we need to be a lot more flexible. There are no 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5ths. Everyone needs to have their own list. Everyone needs to have their own list. See, that's the thing about mentorship and guidance when people come in and ask you. I'm saying, look, what may be good for me cannot possibly be good for you. So watch out when you're looking for mentorship. Because the only best way I can mentor somebody or even give a point of view is asking hard questions. I think what I've learned the most is not when somebody's given me great advice, is when they've asked me the toughest questions, when I've said, damn, why didn't I think of it? So I would say your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th is your list. You have to figure your priority. I was just positioning that what automatically everyone thinks of as first should not be first.
Can you tell us about Unilaser? Again, for this audience, it would be very, very relevant. And you've invested in a lot of companies.
Actually, no, I've not. I think after I moved out of media, I did a little bit of that in between because I was scratching my head. And at that stage, I did a little bit of investments. I'm good. So I realized in that 1 year that I'm much more a doer than sitting on the outside. And therefore, if I'm working with an entrepreneur which I've invested in, if I have 5 good ideas or 5 ideas, forget good, and if that person is going to take 4 out of those 5 ideas, I'm in trouble. Because if somebody thinks 4 of my ideas out of 5 are great, then I'm thinking that person hasn't thought of too many good ideas. But at the end of the first year, I realized I'm much more a builder and I wanted to roll up my sleeves. That's why I always wear short sleeves. And then go out there and really build something. And that's how Upgrad happened. So in that process, I think one took a few investments in impact sectors like agri, a little bit in education, in Lenskart, and some of the others. And it's been an enjoyable trip. But to me, that's not my DNA. I'm not an investor.
Okay, so we're not getting money from you.
I became an entrepreneur because I felt I'm not great at implementing somebody else's vision. So the same way I thought I'd be an investor, and I thought I couldn't do that because for me, just giving inputs was not good enough. And the second part is actually if you're doing investment, then it's its own treadmill, right? You're building a fund, then you're already onto the next fund, then you're onto a third fund. It's a different life cycle altogether. And therefore, I've not looked at it that seriously.
So Upgrad is also a unicorn? Upgrad is also a unicorn?
Is it? Okay.
I don't know. But I know that you don't like the term unicorn. And somewhere we have celebrated too much of unicorn. And right now, I just have to tell you, I was going to a very senior government official's room. And someone outside said, Madam, kuch bhi boliyega, unicorn word mat use kijiyega.
Look, I think celebration is good. Celebration is good as long as it doesn't go to your head. Celebration is always good. But as you said, celebration means you have 2 drinks. When you have 8 drinks, it's no longer a celebration, right? It goes to your head in some form or the other. It has a hangover the next day. So I think, yeah, it's a good label. I think for a country like India to actually state that we are in the top 3 countries in the world coming up with what we would call billion-dollar valued companies is a great positive statement to make. And I don't think we should take away from that. I think the air of caution is it becomes too aspirational. Because if you keep that as a chant so high, then everyone actually feels that's what I want to get. Versus I want to build a business, not I want to be a unicorn. They're 2 very different things. Very, very different things. And let's be very clear. You didn't get $1 billion to be called a unicorn. The chances are you may have got $50 to $100 million. And 1 or 2 of the East Coast investors in the US at that point in time, either through FOMO or looking at India as a story or being guided or misguided as the case may be, put a valuation benchmark for you. So watch out for that because it's a good moment to raise a toast. It's a nice benchmark. It's a good celebration. But if it goes to your head, it's an antidote.
Yeah. And my last question to you at this TechSparks event is, we are all talking about India, India's growth, and we're all witnessing it. Ronnie, you have been an entrepreneur, last 3 decades, a very different era, if I may say so. You started with cable business, which many young people will not even know about that business, to now the tech and the journey you have seen our country make, India make, and you talk about inclusive growth, and we have to. What are 1 or 2 things that you think all of us, when we go back beyond the businesses that we are building, when we think about India, our country, what is it that we should think when we think about the growth?
I think the optimism is very infectious here. It's incredible. I think broadly, if I talk to the people that we are looking at skilling in rural India, or when I talk to in the SME sector, the small and medium scale sector, the manufacturing sector, or other aspiring entrepreneurs, and even leaders from that point of view, I think the belief that tomorrow is better than yesterday and is going to be better than yesterday for me, my family, and for India is very strong. Yeah. And when you have that kind of a actual tailwind, it can make you go the distance. It is the wind beneath your wings. So I think the wind beneath the wings is that positive mantra that tomorrow is going to be better than yesterday. And I think many countries in Europe can't say that. The US will always be in a very different position. And I don't want to get into the geography of it. But I think we're at an incredible cusp of that. However, we've been called the tiger, the lion, the elephant, the everything in life. So we need to be careful that we don't miss the opportunity. We've also been a country that has not walked the last mile. We've always got there, and in 1995 we were almost there, and this happened, but. So most of them are nice praise pieces with a little bit of obituaries. I think this time around, we need to walk the last mile.
So my question is, how important is, since my team is located and setup is at Indore, and we have been facing this challenge of getting close to markets and markets identifying us.
Look, I think if you understand your customer, and you're a part B2B, you're trying to understand your customer with people who want to go there, and you're putting them into touch with other people. So actually being in not Mumbai, which is otherwise proclaimed as the entertainment capital of India, which it is in some form, is actually a good part, because then you're the outsider. I would say my media days, I've succeeded most when I've looked at it from the outsider and not being incestuous. So I would say you're not in a bad place. However, just be careful that you're incredibly in touch with the market sitting from the outside, because your mindset sitting in Indore is going to be what most people in India want to do but can't come to Mumbai for. Right. And that's a capitalization. That's your opportunity. Right. Make sure that the other part of the supply part, you also understand sitting in Indore and visiting here. But otherwise, I think you're doing the right thing. Don't relocate and rent a WeWork in Mumbai.
If you're supposed to sit in a time machine and go back to your 22s, right, when you had just started, so what are the 3 suggestions that you would give to the next Ronnie Screwvala?
First, I would not get into a time machine. That would be my first suggestion. And the reason I say that is because looking at anything in hindsight is a waste of time.
Okay.
To say if only means nothing. Because if only means, if only I did this, but there'd be 9 other things that would have otherwise happened that would have changed that destiny. There is no such thing as I can track back only my track and not understand what 90 other things would have happened in the process.
What a beautiful answer.
Sorry to say that I don't have 3 things. I would just stop at the first one. Don't get in that time machine.
Sure.
We are just starting out right now, and I wanted to understand how important it is and what would be the right approach to get a good tech talent at this point of time when we're just starting out.
No, I think in the business that you're in, tech is important. See, tech should not be over-glorified into this very esoteric. The approach of it being regular and connected to your business is important. So I think the element of tech and product, especially in what you're doing, is critical. But I think 60-70%, we all kind of look at it with a different halo. And if you're not a tech founder, you normally look at it by trying to get someone even super smarter than you. And then the connect is not there. So the only thing I would caution you is, if the founder groups are not tech oriented, see that you have the right business and right connect with the tech team that you're building. Because the approach is, it can talk a very different language, and you need to be careful about that. But I think if you're in the study abroad or in that business or any other business, it's an important part, because the next 5 years, if you can't leverage what people used as SOPs and process, more important today is going to be the leveraging of tech and making tech everything more process oriented, more efficient, more frugal. And when AI comes in, you've got to be at the cutting edge of how that's going to displace some parts of what you're going to do and not duplicate it.
My question to you right now, as you talked about failures, right? We have to accept the fact that you're getting the failure and you have to move forward. Also, you said one thing, that celebration should not be on your head once you achieve a particular goal. So, by facing the failures and see a career on totality basis, I just want to ask you, what was the biggest setback that you faced in your life so that the current generation would get any message from your inputs from that particular failure? Whatever you...
My biggest setback?
Yeah.
It's yet to come.
Oh. Thank you, sir.
Does that answer your question very clearly?
No, yeah, it's answered.
I'm not looking around the bend for it, but I know it's going to come.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I had a question that you're working with Avgrad so closely. I wanted to ask you, Like there are so many developments happening in the education sector, in edtech basically. Now in the conversation we were also mentioning about AI tech. So how do you think, what is the future of technology in education be, and how is a company envisioned to contributing to it?
See, I think tech is an enabler. I've come from a media business also, where the consumer is not first. And most of your businesses, we start getting a little bit sidetracked. Tech is an enabler. It can also forge. It's the frontier. But at the same time, the most important thing is consumer trends actually lead that. All technology, if not adopted by the consumer, is actually missed technology. So what you're seeing is only the success ones. There are 40 other things today that have actually not. I mean, there's a reason why people are slowing down on self-driving cars, which was at one time the frontier. One of the top 5 $1 trillion plus companies renamed their company because they thought the meta universe and the artificial intelligence and AR and VR was going to be the next big thing. So just balance your expectations is what I would say on that.
I'm Vaibhav Shenoy, founder and CEO of Genius, a made in India search engine. So it's a generative AI search engine that we have built. So how can we convince every Indian that from India we can build an internet company of the scale of man? So it's becoming really hard. We have built our own LLMs. We are 10-20 features ahead of Google and Perplexity. But still investors and consumers are not convinced that अरे ये तो Google भी बना लेगा eventually. So how can we convince and shift that mindset even after cracking the tech?
Yes, I'm taking a little bit of a pause before I answer your high energy question. And that is because the only way you can convince, in my opinion, is step by step. Just because you said it doesn't mean somebody's going to believe it. Just because you say, I have a great idea, doesn't mean I need to agree that you have a great idea. Because frankly, there are at least 400 people having great ideas every nanosecond somewhere. The question is how it's going to get implemented. So I think the only thing that you will have to accept is the proof of the pudding is going to be on your implementation. But if you keep saying it from the rooftops and expect people first to take that, you'll actually miss the bus in actually implementing harder and taking it step at a time. Because the time will come when they'll either see that what you're saying is real or it's not real. But my simple answer to you is, don't have this kind of expectation that just because I'm sitting on top of the roof and saying it, people must listen. Otherwise, I'm disillusioned, and it'll just do it step by step.
A big round of applause. This is such a deep, fun, inspirational, learning, genuine, authentic conversation. Thank you.